Ray and Vika became friends after university at Vika's first job. Ray was working there as a courier and had his eye on a young, beautiful girl. After a short but persistent courtship, they became a couple. 6 months later, Ray asked Vika to marry him. 12 years had passed since then, and they both considered it the best years of their lives. Ray was a romantic, gave his wife fancy gifts, and often brought flowers for no reason. For their 10th year together, Ray gave his wife a summer home. She had asked him for a long time. He refused, but secretly from his wife, he built a house on his grandmother's old property. And on the day of the anniversary, he brought Vika to show her the property. The wife was very happy. The man did not expect that his beloved with such soul will treat this case, and was glad that such an expensive gift was not in vain. They went there all year round, sometimes for her son's vacations, sometimes for weekends, but in the summer, Vika preferred to live there permanently. She had quit her job several years ago and could afford to spend 3 months away from the bustle of the city. One day, Ray wanted to build something on the property and ordered a truckload of boards. But he didn't have time to stack them under a shed, and Vika thought it was about to start raining. She decided to move them on her own. The neighbor's son Kosty saw this. "Aunt Vika, can I help you?" She heard his voice. "Yes, if you don't mind." She smiled. Kosty helped to move the boards under the shed, and as a thank you for his help, Vika offered him lunch. The lad agreed. Over a meal, a conversation ensued. Kosty talked about studying at university. He shared a sad story about leaving his girlfriend, and Vika listened to him and remembered her youth. "I wasn't able to get serious with anyone until I met Ray." Suddenly, she admitted, "I kept thinking that I wasn't ready." "Why did you and your husband change your mind?" asked the young man. Vika laughed. "Yes, because Ray did not ask, but stood his ground, and I suddenly gave in. It turns out that he was just lucky that such a gorgeous woman like you became his wife," Kosty said quietly. Vika was stumped by this phrase, and she didn't know what to answer. It seemed wrong to her that a young man should say such words to her, a grown woman. But on the other hand, she was incredibly pleased to hear it. Her guest realized that he had said too much, thanked her for the food, and quickly left to his room. That night, Vika had a heated dream involving a young man, and all the next day she thought about it. Kosty had gone to town to pass his session. He did not come to the cottage for a long time. Gradually, Vika's dream was being forgotten, and she calmed down. But one day, she heard loud voices on the neighboring property and looked out to see what was going on. Kosty had arrived with friends, apparently to celebrate a closed session. The guys were having fun and laughing loudly, and Vika, seeing the young man, felt warm inside. "Hello." He shouted to her across the station and waved. The woman was embarrassed, but waved back. "We're here to celebrate a successful exam. Hope we're not disturbing you." Also shouting, Kosty reported. Vika was pleased by the young man's attention, and she spent the rest of the day secretly spying on him. She purposely set her chair up so that she had a good view of the neighboring cottage and sat down to read a book. She involuntarily admired Kosty's angular movements. Ray had been out of town for 3 weeks, gone to his parents, and Vika was left to her own thoughts and fantasies. It was late at night. She was drinking tea on the veranda and heard the gate open. "And I brought you something." Kosty appeared from around the corner with an empty bottle of something strong. "Mine are all gone, and I don't want to go to bed yet. We can sit together," Vika suggested. She was already planning to drag Kosty into the bedroom, but he got ahead of her when, right after the first drink, he started kissing her. It had been a long time since the woman had experienced such a range of emotions with her husband. In the middle of the night, the young man left for his room. Kosty began to drop in on his neighbor more often. He, young and hot, loved the idea that they were doing something forbidden. It inflamed his desire even more. Their meetings continued until Ray returned, and ended just the day he returned. It all turned out unexpectedly for all three of them. Ray decided to surprise his wife, so he did not call her when he went home. On the way to the country house, he stopped for groceries, bought her favorite wine and flowers, and went to his wife's house. He did not know then that she had also prepared a surprise for him. That evening, Vika, as always, was waiting for her lover. She cleaned herself up after the hot day. She put on a little makeup and let her hair down. There was a knock at the door, and then Kosty came in. When he saw his beloved from the threshold, he immediately rushed to her. In a fit of passion, they did not hear the car pull up to the house and the creaking gate open. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't pay attention, not even to the footsteps on the stairs. Vika was just kneeling in front of her young lover when the door swung open and Ray appeared on the threshold. In shock, Kosty pushed her away from him and quickly covered himself with a sheet lying on the bed. The bag Ray was holding fell to the floor. There was a clang of glass, but the young man didn't even have time to notice what had broken, because a moment later the man was beside him, and a heavy fist slammed into Kosty's face. He became afraid for himself, for the weight advantage was clearly on Vika's husband's side, and who knows what a man is capable of in anger. Kosty started begging to be let go. Vika pulled her husband away from his lover and gave him time to grab his clothes and run away. She managed to notice that a bruise had begun to form under his eye. "I'm not done with you yet," Ray growled. "It's my fault. Don't touch the boy." The wife tried to take all the blame. The husband shifted his gaze to his spouse and shook her by the shoulders in a way that made Vika's eyes blurry. She was ready for a blow from her husband, but he let her go and sat down on the table, breathing heavily. The woman wanted to talk to him, but he made it clear that there would be no conversation, and she threw on her robe and went outside. She wanted to see how Kosty was doing, but she knew it was dangerous, and an enraged Ray might make trouble if she saw her going to her neighbor's house. She had been sitting on the veranda for about an hour when her husband joined her. He was serious and very upset. Neither of them dared to start a dialogue first. "Why?" was the short word Ray used to break the silence. Vika shrugged her shoulders. She really had nothing to say. But how to explain to her spouse this desire of hers? He wouldn't understand, no matter how hard she tried, and he would be right. Vika was silent, studying the floor with her gaze. She tried not to look at her husband. He realized the dialogue was not going to happen and said he was leaving here. The woman cried the rest of the night. Sometimes people commit a spontaneous act and don't think about the consequences, don't think about how it will affect their lives in the future. Such was the case with Vika. Having given in to the fleeting desire to be with a young lover, she did not think about what would happen next. She understood that her husband was right when he filed for divorce. But deep down, she desperately wanted Ray to forgive her. But he thought otherwise. At home, the man packed up all the things to change and took everything to her parents' house. He gave his son the choice to decide for himself where he wanted to live, so he did not touch his things. The shocked mother-in-law asked what had happened, and Ray told her everything as it was. The woman turned bad. She reproached her daughter for a long time with these actions and lamented that she had missed her upbringing somewhere. At the age of 36, Vika was left alone. She couldn't imagine a single life after 12 years of marriage and tried to get used to it. Now let's move on to the second story. It tells how an encounter ruined the life of a married couple. Be sure to watch to the end. Molly and Andy met completely by chance when they were both spending time with friends at the ice rink. Molly rented skates, put them on, and started tying them. But she didn't have the strength to tighten the laces any tighter. Her friends were already out on the ice, and Andy came to help her. He was so solicitous in asking how the girl was feeling, and if he was tightening her skates tightly that she melted. That day, they separated from their companies and skated together. From that moment on, they never let go of each other's hands again. They had been married for 5 years. At some point, all the magic of their feelings, the constant desire to be near, around the clock, was gone. Life and decisions together took its place now. Love subsided, rose-colored glasses fell, and the spouses began to pay attention to each other's imperfections. After a series of quarrels on entirely different occasions, a lull came. At times, it bordered on indifference. Andy knew about his wife's stubborn nature, so he knew that in these conflicts and other unpleasant situations, he would be the one to make up. It didn't bother him. The man had the opposite of his wife's character. In addition, he understood that if these small problems were not solved, they would eventually accumulate and destroy their family, so he tried with all his might to get their relationship with Molly going again. Her husband really wanted to have children. He had a stable job, a good salary, and his own house, which he inherited from his relatives, where he lived with his wife. Molly worked, too, but even if they lost that source of income, it wouldn't change much. Andy knew he could do just fine on his own. In short, all the possibilities were there, only Molly wasn't particularly eager to become a mother. At first she said she still needed to live for herself. Then she repeated that pregnancy and the subsequent care of a baby was very energy-consuming, and she was not ready for such a change. Her husband waited patiently for Molly to feel that she was ready and wanted to have children herself. He constantly showed by his actions that he would be a wonderful father and provider, and she would not be lost with him. But none of this helped, and the atmosphere at home did not want to get better. At some point, Molly began to stay late from work more and more often. Andy missed the moment when it all started. He woke up when he came home and faked last night's dinner himself, or when he ordered the food that had already been prepared. His wife justified this by the fact that they had many new clients at work, and the time had become disastrously short. Time flies by while you're sorting things out and talking to everybody, and it's already 8 o'clock. Andy, of course, was not very happy with this arrangement, but little depended on him. The wife loved her job, and she loved her company. Because of these perpetual overtime, his wife began to refuse intimacy more and more often, citing fatigue. The husband realized that at this rate, the issue with the continuation of the family could drag on for an obscenely long time, so he even began to offer Molly to quit her job and rest at home. But the woman responded that she was fine with everything and didn't need that kind of rest just yet. This inconsistency left Andy utterly puzzled. After about a few months of this rhythm of life, it was over. His wife's perpetual delays from work stopped. She started coming home on time, but it seemed to make her mood worse. She was moody, nervous, and not very talkative. When her husband asked if she was okay, if anything had happened, she snapped at him. Though Andy tried to improve their relationship, constantly trying to please his beloved, but it had already crossed all boundaries of reasonableness. A relationship should not be a one-way game. One day, he and his wife went to a housewarming party at a mutual friend's house on the other side of town, and for some reason, Molly was noticeably nervous as she and Andy drove through the neighborhood. As they parked the car and got out of it, his wife looked around nervously, and then something completely unexplainable happened. At least, that's what Andy thought at the time. As they walked past the driveway looking for what they needed, a woman ran up to Molly and started to insult her on the spot and even tried to grab her by the hair. But her husband intervened in time to shield his wife. Thinking it was some kind of local madwoman, the woman's eyes really were crazy at that moment. Yeah, there's nothing to protect that scum. It ruins families. I got 2 kids. What were you thinking? The stranger kept shouting. Andy asked the woman to leave them alone, took Nadia under his arm, and led her to the right entrance. Are you all right? What was that all about? Her husband asked. Spring aggravation. Do you know how many of them are not examined? Mumbled the wife. She pretended not to understand what had just happened. But that was a lie. At a housewarming party at a friend's house, the couple were distracted from this unpleasant situation. It wasn't until later, when they were home, that Andy realized that the situation had not left him. What was that woman screaming? that Molly was a family destroyer, but an ordinary woman wouldn't shout such specific accusations against a stranger. He tried to find out from Molly if she knew what it was after all, but talking to his wife got him nowhere. He only noticed that Molly tried not to look him in the eye when she answered, and that she herself was tensed at this point. The man decided to dig further. It might not yield any clues, but making sure nothing was being hidden from him was also a result. He checked his wife's phone and her home computer, all to no avail, until the day when chance decided everything for him. One night, Molly texted her husband to stop by the store to buy groceries. Andy was just leaving work and decided to stop by the nearest chain store. He was standing near a shelf with various porridge and cereals. Suddenly, a woman caught his attention. She was holding her daughter with one hand to make sure she did not run away with the cart, and with the other hand, she was rocking a stroller with a very tiny baby. At the same time, she was examining the goods she needed. It was obvious how hard it was for her to manage all the affairs alone, and the older child kept asking her when they were going to Daddy's. Andy realized he had seen this woman before. She was the one who had run up to Molly with the insults at the time. Only now she already appeared to him in a different guise. She didn't have a hint of any inadequacy on her, just a tired mother. At this point, her daughter did break free and ran up to Andy, trying to start some kind of game of her own with him. The woman looked in his direction and was stunned. She remembered him too. "Baby, don't mess with me. I'm sorry," she said. The man realized that this was his chance. He made a joke about the situation with the girl that had just happened, and then he changed the conversation to something that interested him. He introduced himself and asked about that strange incident in the yard. As soon as the woman found out that Andy was Molly's husband, she went pale. "You don't know anything, do you?" she whispered. "What am I supposed to know?" strictly asked the man. And then Sveta, that was the woman's name, told him of her recent grief. The fact that she caught her husband Gleb in adultery, and then recognized his mistress from the pictures in his phone. "Your wife's name is Molly, and she works in the office on Spasskaya?" asked Sveta. "Yes," cautiously, said the interlocutor, remembering the strange delays his wife at work and how her mood has changed. "But are you sure you were not mistaken?" he continued. "If you do not believe me, you can go through your wife's underwear," said the woman frankly. "I found blue lace panties in his car. And how, I did not return them to their owner. I mean, I don't understand." Andy was stunned by what she said. But check the completeness of the set. She should have kept the blue bra. But the panties were a mess, she grinned sadly. Andy, still not fully aware of what had just happened, just in case, exchanged phone numbers with Sveta, thanked her, and went home. The first thing he did when he entered the apartment was go to the dresser where his wife kept her underwear. He remembered that Molly did have a blue set when they were still doing well. She often teased her husband by wearing this beautiful lingerie. The bra was found, but it was nowhere to be seen. "What are you doing, Andy?" A surprised wife came into the bedroom. "There's just one more thing." "Where are your blue lace panties?" husband asked. The wife stood in a stupor. "Why do you suddenly need them?" She answered the question with a question. "Yes, I wonder if Gleb has them, or still here." The man sneered. For a second, fear flashed in Molly's eyes. But then she pretended that her husband was talking nonsense. At that moment, he got a message on his phone. She wrote, "If you still don't believe me, here's more." And then she sent him pictures of his Molly with some man. They were hugging, and it was very clear that there was a connection between them. Her husband turned the phone toward Molly. There was no getting away from her here. Andy kicked her out the same night. The apartment belonged to him. He did not want to continue to tolerate such a neglectful attitude from an unfaithful spouse. Molly still tried to say something to justify himself, but the man would not listen. Soon he filed for divorce. Later he learned that after Sveta caught her husband in adultery, she gave him an incredible scandal. after which the man on emotion even broke up with Molly. Everything was coming together. It was then that she stopped staying late at work and her mood completely soured. Andy was hurt that he had wasted so much time on a woman who was so uncaring about him and his love. Fortunately, he didn't become bitter and soon found one who became a model wife and gave him his long-awaited child. And now Molly lived alone. She was burdened with a lot of problems, from household to problems in her personal life and at work. Fate showed her in all colors what happens when you ruin other people's lives for the sake of their fleeting desires. Share in the comments what you think about this situation and the behavior of the characters.